Okay, so today we are going to do the first tutorial in the cooking animation tutorial series. We are going to make this short, inshallah. But first, we have to do the textures of the models, then we have to do the fire animation, then we have to do the cooking animation itself, the bubbles and all those things. First up is the textures of the assets. So we are going to start with the carrot. It's not very focused on in this animation, but since I am doing a cooking animation series, it'll be best to show how to make some vegetables so that, you know, if you plan on making actual animation where the carrot is focused on, then it'll be nice and detailed. So first we start with the carrot. It's basically a simple texture. You just bring in a mix RGB and then you set the color to a nice orange. This bottom one should actually be white. I made it black at the beginning, but you can make it white. Then I brought in a noise texture and plugged that into the factor, and Control T to the noise texture and plug it into the object mode. You can play around with the detail. I set the detail to a bit high, and then I plugged in a color ramp into the factor, and you want the black to be dominant. And you want the black to be dominant. And then you want to play around with the scale. So you want these nice long lines. The X should be pretty small, the Y should be a bit bigger, and the Z should be large, so that it could be like stretched lines. You can copy this if you want to, because I'm pretty sure it'll be almost exactly the same for you. By the way, the model for the carrot is very simple. It's just basically a cylinder with a sharp edge and a beveled top. Duplicate the mix RGB, set it to mix. I set it to add and then color at the beginning, but I ended up using mix, so rather stick to mix. Basically, we are going to make those brown edges on the carrot to add a little color variation. So then we plug in the color ramp, plug in the noise texture to the color ramp, and then make it a bit smaller so that you can have these colors in different places other than the white, because if it's on the same place as the white, then you're just replacing the white. So, you know, play around with the noise, make it a bit less, maybe make the scale a bit smaller. It's up to you. And that is basically the base texture for our carrot. Nice and simple. Now you plug that into the BSDF, and then you just make the roughness a bit lower. And if you wanted the texture to be a bit brighter, I brought in a hue, saturation and value node and made the value around 2 so that it can be brighter. That's pretty much it for the carrot. Next up is our tomato. Tomato is a bit more tricky. So bring in a mix RGB, plug in a gradient texture at the bottom, and Control T the gradient texture. And in front of that gradient texture, add a color ramp. That color ramp should be plugged into the factor, because what we want to do is we want to make color variation between the two red colors. So the darker one is going to be at the bottom, and the lighter one is going to be at the top. And for the rotation, we want it to be coming from the bottom to the top, so we rotate it on the Y 90%. Might be different for you, but for me it is 90 on the Y. Just make it so that the darker red is coming from the bottom and the lighter red is on top, so that, you know, you get this nice color variation. Not very visible, but it's still there. And obviously set the roughness to very low. And now what we are going to do is we are going to add the green at the top of the tomato. So plug that node setup into the top portion of the mix RGB and plug in another gradient setup at the bottom. Instead of the gradient being on linear, we make that quadratic sphere. Make the texture coordinate to object. This is so that you can properly control that quadratic sphere. And then you just play around with the Z axis, and then you bring up that circle to that top point of the tomato. So now, since the color ramp is plugged into the factor, all we need to do is change the bottom color of the mix RGB and set that to around a greenish yellowish tint. And there we go, we have that nice greenish orange thingy at the top, but we don't want it to be like a uniform circle, as in the reference is not very uniform. So we add another mix RGB in front of that color ramp with a quadratic sphere. Get a color ramp and plug that into the factor node, and plug a noise texture into that color ramp. Control T the noise texture and play around so that you get black at the top part of the tomato, and play around with that until you get this nice weathered edges of the circle. So it's not all uniform circle, it's more of it has some variety. And there we have our nice rugged green texture on top of our tomato. And for the leaf of the tomato, it's actually pretty simple. We just have a diffuse shader, add a normal plug into the diffuse shader, and then we just set the color to something a bit more yellow than green, just so that it doesn't look too plain. It looks kind of like an apple, but you know, the leaf thing is a bit different. So if you want to make an apple, you can just take away the leaf and that leaf thing and add that apple stem. But whatever. What we are going to do now is we're just going to add some highlights. As you can see on the reference, there are some spotted highlights. All we need to do is duplicate the quadratic sphere again, reposition it with the mapping node, and make the circle a bit smaller. And plug that into a mix RGB that is set to add, and pull the factor to full, so that you know these highlights are added to the tomato. And you can add as many as you want on this. I added around 2. In some of my other models I added 3. But this is the basic textures for some of the vegetables I made. This is just for the background of the pot and to act as ingredients for what is being cooked inside the pot. You can use this kind of format for any vegetables you want to make. Basically just texture nodes with mix RGBs, color ramps, adding, multiplying, coloring, all those good things. But that is it for today. Hope you learned something. Alright, bye.